Hello dear friends and welcome to Artsy Not Fartsy. Today I'm using Lavinia Stamps and Nuvo Shimmer powders on a Gelliplate. My grandmother asked me for 10 Easter cards and I thought I would make a card series out of it. I'm mixing water and the blue and green shimmer powders into 2 bottle caps. When Lavinia Stamps make their videos, they often use another pigment powder called brushes, like I will do now, and see if their technique works with what I have, and that is Distress Oxides and Nuvo Shimmer powders. My friend Linda sent me this smaller Gelliplate and I'm putting it in my stamping platform not to control the jelly print itself. I love how unpredictable jelly prints can be. I have it in my platform to control where my Gelliplate will print because I want it in the middle of my card panel. I am using Distress Oxide's in Faded Jeans and Rustic Wilderness for these prints. I wasn't very happy at all with my first print, but I left it in to show how little ink you really need. I first apply the ink from my ink pad directly to the Gelliplate and try to fade out the harsh lines with my blending tool before I sprinkle the shimmer powder water onto my plate and print. I didn't want my print that dark, so the next print I only applied the ink with my blending tool, Faded Jeans at the top and Rustic Wilderness at the bottom, and sprinkled my shimmery water and get a print I love. When I press down onto watercolor cardstock, you can see the color move together with the shimmer powders. And look at that lovely print with a hint of shimmer. I'm making 2 cards this time, so I need another print. So I flip the bad print over and use the other side to do another print in the same way, applying my ink with a light hand and sprinkle on that shimmer water, overlapping the green splashes with the blue, and I get another lovely print for my cards. I'm using Lavinia Stamps because of their organic, whimsical and magical vibe. I stamped them in Versafine Onyx Black Ink, which is a slow-drying ink and works perfect for embossing. I cover my images with Wow Clear Dull Matte embossing powder. You can use any clear embossing powder or not emboss at all. This dull matte powder is just my personal preference. And I melt the powder with a heat tool and continue until I have all my images stamped and embossed. Embossing makes watercoloring easy because it creates a raised edge that contains the color. These are going to be Easter cards and I want light spring colors for my images. To keep everything matching, I use Distress Oxides for the coloring too, starting off with pinks in picked raspberry, kitch flamingo and spun sugar. These images already have shading built in, and I add the darkest picked raspberry first and blend it out with kitch flamingo and spun sugar. I don't mind if I paint over the spots on the toadstool, because I will go over the spots with a white gel pen later. For the little houses, I used scattered straw for the stem and crackling campfire and candied apple for the top, blending them out together with water. For the whimsical flowers, I used Rustic Wilderness and twisted citron, putting down the dark Rustic Wilderness first at the base and blending it out with twisted citron at the top. When it's all painted in, I fussy cut all my images and go over their edges with a black marker, as always. When my images are all dry and cut out, I use that white gel pen to fill in the white spots and add a few highlights too. If you hear any background noise, it would be my boys playing video games or my dog Boo barking at any creature that dare to set foot outside our house. Now let's get back to the background, and I use a stencil from Alternew to stencil in a pattern around my jelly print. I use a makeup brush because of their soft bristles that easily give me a soft, smooth blend. I use Rustic Wilderness at the bottom and move my stencil to the top and stencil in with faded jeans to keep everything together. The key is a light hand, and I do the same to the other card, being careful not to touch the jelly print. I start off the blending on my masking tape and using less ink than you would ever think. And now we have these two whimsical spring backgrounds. So I have my backgrounds and my images, and it's time to build a magical spring scene using the Lavinia Wilderness stamp set to add my focal points. I use my images to test out where to stamp my wild hares, and I stamp the first hare in Versafine Onyx Black Ink and emboss him with that wow clear matte dull embossing powder. When the powder is melted, I glue down that little house so it looks like the hare is sitting on the roof looking at the sky. And since my stamping wasn't perfect, I use a black marker to touch up my little friend, and no one but me and you will know it wasn't a perfect image. I want a spotlight for my hopping friend, so I use a piece of acetate to make a circle mask, but you can use a piece of packaging or paper, it really doesn't matter. I decide where I want my spotlight, and I will use Distress Oxide in faded jeans again. I start blending on the mask, just barely touching the edge, and I go around the mask, creating that spotlight. And because that hair is embossed, I can easily wipe off any excess ink on him with a wet wipe. I use a brush with clean water and cover the spotlight before I use a paper towel to lift color, and I do that a couple of times, and then I have this pale circle that I was aiming for. But I think this card needs more greenery, and I use this Lavinia stamp with leaves, and to keep the color scheme I have Arcival waterproof ink in faded jeans, and I ink up the stamp and skip the acrylic block to be able to manipulate the stamp to only stamp inside the jelly print. I go around the edges, filling it up with beautiful leaves, and when I get to the green part of the card, I use Arcival ink in peeled paint, and I think it works since there are no Arcival Rustic Wilderness. Sometimes I stamp twice without inking up in between to get variation in the intensity and more depth in the scene. For the edges, I pick a darker blue chipped sapphire and ink up those edges to have a nice vignette for my scene. Now, let's leave this card for a moment and focus on the other card with a hare standing up on two legs, peeking at something. I ink her up in the same way as before and emboss her in wow clear matte dull embossing powder. And I do the same spotlight technique as before, as I have seen Lavinia design team do many times. I place my mask and start blending on the mask, and carefully go around the mask again with faded jeans. Then I ink up the edges with chipped sapphire, and now it's time to start thinking of the last details. I cut my pink toadstools down a bit to fit my vision and glue them down before I bring out that gorgeous leaf stamp, and this time on a stamping block, aiming my stamping carefully. Inking up with the Arcival faded jeans for the top and Arcival peeled paint for the bottom, filling that frame with leaves and using the smaller leaf stamp to fill in small spaces. You all have seen this before, but I left it in so those interested can get a repeat and those uninterested can fast forward, but not too long. I still have a couple of aces up my sleeve. When the leaves are all stamped, I start gluing down the other images, and those light green flowers really brighten up these crowded cards. You who follow me know that I don't know when to stop. I pull out my wow embossing powder in vintage champagne with glitter in it and bring in this fairy stamp set. I use my anti-static powder bag to make sure the powder only sticks to my fairy. Then I stamp the fairy inside the spotlight in Versamark clear embossing ink and cover her with wow vintage champagne powder and heat set until she is melted and glittery. The fairies are, in my mind, what the hare is trying to get a look at, and I do the same for the other card. In hindsight, I would have stamped the fairies in black, but this way they are hidden until the light hits the glitter, and I like that too. I always need that black frame, and I glue down my panels on black cardstock and use my tonic guillotine trimmer to trim down the black to a thin frame. The absolutely last detail is to use a shimmer brush marker and add shimmer to the moon, the toadstools and the flowers. And then my two first Easter cards are finished. I hope you had some fun and feel inspired. I cherish every one of you who watch my videos and hope you return soon again. Until the next time, see you soon.